you consume about 45,000 liters. That's how much we are consuming. So the more you consume, and it's 2 of these units that you need at Ankerleg. So essentially it's 90,000 liters of diesel per hour. So that's the cost to the South African economy. No, that's the cost to the fiscus. And then the next conversation is, if we are unable to get the kind of base load that helps us to close this gap on the demand side, we have to run this plant. I'm saying they come at great cost. You must answer a different question. There is a question to the fiscus, the actual amount that you use to buy the diesel. And then there's a cost of not running them to the South African economy. It means that you could be at higher stages of load shedding. These are difficult choices that are confronting us. We are going to cabinet and presenting before cabinet what we think is the best solution to our problems here. As I conclude, I want to tell you about the transversal issues. There's people issues there at ESCOM. People issues nothing to do with the leadership, by the way. People issues to do with, if you like, job security. I told you that Camden is closing. There are a number of stations that are closing. Grootfontein, the units are gone. I know the units are going. That's people attached to that. And there's no additional incentive for people to apply themselves. The best that you need to run these plants don't see their future at ESCOM. And I'm just saying it's a conversation we must have. And as we say we discontinue these units, it's important to say to us, where is that additional generation capacity that can meet this base load megawatt per megawatt? It's one thing to be on an accelerated path of decarbonization. And by the way, renewables is the future. You can see the aggregate share of the energy mix is growing exponentially. But you are sitting with a crisis now that is undermining energy sovereignty of this country. People are out of jobs. The economy is on its knees. Businesses are closing. Farmers can't produce. They're passing on that cost to the end consumer. The poor are disproportionately affected. There are very difficult choices that are before us. And we are helping to make that determination on what should continue to be, what should be the case going forward. And one of those choices is, do you close at the current rate, undermine the ability of the economy to recover, exacerbate the load shedding problem, or you delay, refurbish, there's capital cost associated with that. The South African economy stands up, it's able to run on its own. You create opportunity for us to take units out for plant maintenance and secure the future of this country and posterity. I think that's the situation that is confronting us. And then there are also design issues. Attend to the issues of outage slip. So essentially, you say, I'll return this unit by this date, you fail to return it by this date. Just yesterday, the total amount of megawatts that were absent from the grid was 1,900 as a result of outage slips. So when management says, I will return this unit by this date, and it doesn't come back, there's 1,900 megawatts. Just the other day, I think it's 2 days ago, which we could not get as a result of outage slips. That's not a state of disaster, it's a planning issue. And by extension, it's a procurement issue. It is that dispensation of saying, let's go straight to the original equipment manufacturer. Then we are able to reduce the stages of load shedding. Get the economy going, we'll be able to expand opportunities to everyone. The other one that I kept on repeating is about investments into these assets to address emissions, the cooling, the quality of coal, so that we invest in those coal plus mines, because on contract we can determine what is the quality of coal that we want. On the cost plus, we have to make those investments. It's a capital cost. You'll argue that the ESCOM balance sheet can't carry. I'm saying answer a different question. Can the South African economy afford that? And the answer is an emphatic no. And that's a balancing act that needs to happen. So in conclusion, we know that Kusile will give us 2,100 megawatts projected by the 24th of December. We know that if we address the Kendall issues of emissions, I've shared with you what the options are, and I didn't tell you what is our preferred option, which we'll present to Cabinet. It's about 1,000 megawatts. We know that as a result of improvements in the coal quality, investing in those mines, not necessarily about the miners. Of course, it comes at cost to the fiscal, it comes at cost to the Eskom balance sheet, but the returns are greater to the South African economy. We can get about an additional 1,200 megawatts. And then just on the cooling towers, as Krill was raising and others, there's another 900 megawatts. So if you like, it's 2,100. Is 1,000 is 3,100. Is another 1,200 is 4,300. It's another 300 is 4,600. It's another 900 is about 5,400 of these megawatts that are locked there. And once we address the issues of slips, retaining the units as planned, and outage planning is thorough, then you're talking, like I said just the other day, was 1,900 megawatts. So suddenly you could be out of load shedding. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. It is those choices that must be made. And we'll present that to Cabinet and come back to the country and say this is what is possible. You will see that in this submission. I've not said anything about additional generations from the renewable energy complex, because we'll be engaging with them. I'm giving you feedback on the fossil fuel and nuclear. I will come back and give you feedback on the renewables to say this is what is on stream, this is what is possible, these are the number of projects that are on stream, these are the number of electrons that can be evacuated. By that I mean, as a result of the weaknesses or the capacity of the grid, we are unable to evacuate the electrons. The renewable energy complex in this country is in the Northern Cape, but the grid capacity is in Mpumalanga, coming to the center and to the south for obvious reasons, because mines are constructed, or power stations are constructed at the mouth of these mines, closer to source, so closer to feedstock. But your renewable energy complex is in the Northern Cape, and then it's take or pay. Whether Eskom is using these electrons or not, they must pay. And that's why it's got implications on their tariff structure. Because they are paying and yet we don't get this benefit. Or in some instances, they must slow down what the units can produce, their own units, because we must accommodate some of these renewables. So it's important that there has to be investment in the grid, and that's a conversation. We'll come back to you so that we take you step by step, and there's an appreciation of what is possible going into the future. And as I conclude, like I do all the time, I'm more than confident that we've got both the capacity, the will, and the expertise to resolve this load shedding. I'm more than confident. And I'm sure that once I go to Cabinet and map up what these options are, we should be able to say to you that these are the timelines that it takes. Of course, on others, the timelines are known. They are public on what Kusile can do. On the issues of emissions, a function of whether you go this option, that option, if you choose the option of exemptions, but committing to mitigating and over a period to addressing those emission levels is another 1,000 megawatts. The issues around investments in the quality of coals at the mine, so that we assist the miners to get us the right quality of coal, right calorific value, burn rate, and therefore the efficiency of the plant and the reduction of the emission. It's possible if we make those investments. And then the issues around ensuring that we keep up the morale, essentially extending the life of these plants, giving us a scope and play for us to be able to get the 6,000 megawatts and not be on an aggressive, accelerated path of decarbonization, but still committing to the decarbonization journey. It's a conversation that only Cabinet can have, and make that determination is not mine, and I don't want to preempt it. So I'll conclude then. My apologies for being long. I thought that it's important that it's not a traditional press conference. It's just to take everyone through on what these issues are, so that there's a common appreciation of what this means. And you have seen in everything that I've shared with you, there is nothing that is reliant on the declaration of state of disaster. That you go to direct to the original equipment manufacturer, you invoke the provisions of the PFMA. Could be either emergency agency or sole provider, whichever one is appropriate. You making investments in those cooling towers, refurbishing some of these plants, has nothing to do with the state of disaster. You returning units at the time that you committed to what I call outage state slips has nothing to do with issues of state of disaster. It's got everything to do with planning. And that's the point that we're making. Thank you very much. We'll take the questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, I'll take questions. If you could please just introduce yourself and your media house, just for our noting before you ask the question. I'll start this side, will be first, second, Heidi third. You'll be fourth. Thanks.
Minister, it's Diaz Onetonje from Eyewitness News. As you mentioned there in your conclusion, this is not a traditional press briefing and it was very technical. But I wanted to just ask if you could simplify this for the normal person out there on the street. What are the problems, or the top 3, top 5 problems that you've identified? And what are the possible solutions without getting too technical, just so that our viewers and our listeners would be able to understand them? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, Minister. Thank you for that very detailed briefing on all the different power stations. You are focusing, at least here, on maintaining and improving the performance of these power stations. Well, actually, for the last 3 years, we've heard a lot about that from the previous CEO of Eskom and so forth. And what we kept also hearing was that additional generational capacity is needed in order to have the space to do the kind of maintenance that needed to happen for, to improve the EAF. And that additional generation capacity hasn't been there. I mean, you haven't talked about additional capacity from elsewhere. And I just wondered how you think all of this is going to be possible without it. And then coming back to money, and yeah, the Eskom balance sheet is one thing, but the government also has a balance sheet, which is a bit tight. And if we go the route of focusing on coal, extending the life of coal plants, rather than decommissioning them according to schedule, not more aggressively, it's the $8.5 billion that was promised to South Africa to help it transition away from coal and perhaps be used to strengthen the grid will not be there. And I just wondered, how that factors into the equation. And then my last question, during the budget, the Treasury talked about, the Finance Minister talked about a plan to concession out the coal plants to improve the EAF. And there's a report from an international consortium which is due in June. Where are we with this? Is that still on the table? Is that part of your framework here? And sorry, just one more. When are you going to be presenting your options to Cabinet? Thank you.
You didn't give us your name in media.
Sorry. It's Mariam Issa, and I'm with Edens.
Heidi.
Heidi Chakos from ENCA. I just want to ask, Minister, with all the issues that you've raised, what does the forecast look like for winter? You said that you would tell us, so I'm just wondering what that looks like. And then I have this question, Minister, please ask the Minister if this authority has been fully defined. President said in SONA that the authority of the Electricity Minister would be set up. So what authority does he have compared to Minister Gwede and Minister Praveen as far as Eskom and other energy matters are concerned? And then I just want to ask a question around the national state of disaster. Were any decisions made under the national state of disaster to deal with the energy crisis? Any important decisions that were made? And if so, what does that mean because the national state of disaster has been terminated? Thank you.
Okay, last question, I'll take a
It's
second.
here. Right. Good morning, Minister Katlaba Logodi here from the SABC. Mine is also on the national state of disaster. We saw the move to lift the national state of disaster, and you at length went on to say that most of the findings there at these power stations had nothing to do with the declaration of the national state of disaster. Then could we say that this announcement was rushed of us as a country going into a national state of disaster before taking into considerations all the groundwork that needs to be done to inform that move to declare the national state of disaster? Also, in line with what my colleague asked there around the fact that you are going to be approaching cabinet here for some of these issues to be solidified. When are we seeing this happen? The temperatures are dropping, we're inching towards winter, and people are in need of some sort of a reprieve here. Are we expecting to see you, promptly approaching cabinet here? And what would be your expectations in terms of some of the short-term and the long-term issues that you've noted down as the intervention methods that are needed there? And also just finally, on the deployment of the army at some of these facilities, we saw the president announcing that the armies will be deployed to some of these facilities. What are their findings? They've been stationed there. Have they actually given you some sort of feedback to say that this is what we are finding and this is what we've managed to really in any way mitigate since our deployment to some of these stations? Do we expect to see them also continuing in their mandate there, or these interventions really don't in any way accommodate them stationed at some of these power plants? Thank you.
Thanks. I think I'll take the last two. The Minister can answer.
Hi, Minister. My name is Tim Beckford. I'm from River News. Just in addition to the question from EE Intelligence on the capital refurbishments, it sounds like you are going to require a lot of money. Obviously, that will be up to the finance minister to make a determination of where the money comes from. But do you have a figure in mind around about how much we would need to bring about the kind of progress that you would like to see? And then with the exemptions for the emissions, would that just be with regard to the Kendal Power Station, or are there others that would benefit from those kinds of exemptions? And maybe if you can elaborate further, do you have sort of timelines in mind for how long those exemptions would be for in order to maximize that benefit? And then finally, just in terms of the targets that have been set out in the Action Energy Plan, in your findings, have you identified any targets that might need to be amended? Maybe we can bring some forward, maybe some needs to be extended longer, etc. Thank you.
Morning, Minister. This is Amanda Khoza from the Sunday Times. I just want to know, is the Minister saying that there was no need for a state of disaster to be declared?
Morning, Minister. Peter Malemane from Kaya FM. Minister, investment in the quality calls increasing lifespan of some of the units, improving cooler towers or system. Do we have the budget, Minister? ESCOM cannot afford that. Where is the money going to come from? Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much for those questions. Sonda, part of the difficulty of the conversation is very technical. And as an engineer, I've got a great affinity to numbers. But let me try and simplify it, because I think it's a justified request that just simplify it, man, to an ordinary person. Okay. I'm going to use the metaphor of a car. And I'm going to use an Audi. Choice of an Audi is because that's the car I drive. So the original manufacturer is Audi or VW from that image. And then when I take the car, buy it the first time, they tell me that you must bring the car every 15,000 kilometers. You must bring the car in for checkup. It doesn't mean that the car is broken. So in engineering technical terms, we call that philosophy maintenance. It's just the philosophy of the design of the car. Because they're the original equipment manufacturer, they know what could go wrong with the car, what components wears off. Of course, it's a function of your driving behavior and other things. But they know on average that this is what we are expecting. So what I do is that I take this car. So think of my car as a power station, a unit at the power station. I drive it. And with the modern cars, it tells you that you are due for service in the next 2,000 kilometers. I get to that point, I go past that point. I make no effort to take the car in. And I get surprised, 23,000 kilometers later, it has broken. So that's philosophy maintenance. So we have not been, in some instances, that has not been done. And of course, in some instances, in my car, because it's under motor plan, I don't have to pay for it. But in this instance, it could be that you have to pay for it when you have to take it in as part of that philosophy maintenance. And because I don't have that money, I choose not to. And when the car breaks down, it means that there's multiple components that have broken down. And that's when the unit gets to be taken out of operation. So that car is not there on the road, it's now in the garage. And then it reduces that unit, our performance of the power station, what we call the energy availability factor. So there's this car that is out of the 81 cars, because there are 81 units. Every power station, the power station has got anything from 6 to 10 units per station. So it brings it down. And as more cars goes out, it comes down and down. And half of the cars are out, and that's why we call 53%. And then the second one is that I know that I'm going to take this car. Now I'm fine. I know I'm going to stick by the rules. I'm going to take it in after 10,000, not 15,000 kilometers. And then because I know it, in this instance, I'm not talking to a workshop. When I take it there, I expect them to have the parts ready. That's why you take it in the morning. They look at it because they know what needs to be fixed. The parts are already there. They are in the store. They get those. In some of the instances here, when the car goes out, the part is not there. Then they phone the original equipment. Oh, they say we need this part. That chap says, no, I've got so many orders. You have to wait. And that's what I call outage slips. You said you'll bring the car back in a day, and now it's taking 6 days. And the system is suffering. The third one has to do with, I take the car in, so that's the Minupi situation. When these chaps open the car, they find that, no man, I had gone somewhere, some corner street, I've replaced the pistons with some fake piston. And that's the one that is undermining the performance of the car. And that's the point I was making with regards to Kusile. Then you find that as they open this car, they find that parts that don't belong here. And as a result of that, it has undermined the efficiency of the performance of the car. And then the other one is that I choose not to take the car in because I just don't have the money. I don't have the money to take the car in. And let's assume that this was a minibus. It's an income generating, if you like, vehicle. I don't take it in. So if I don't take it in, then I lose my ability to make an income. And then I just decide to drive and drive and drive until the car comes to a point where it can't take it further. And then on the efficiency, when I buy my Audi, they tell me that it can do up to 120 kilometers an hour. But because I'm not maintaining it, the maximum I can do is about 53 kilometers an hour. So I'm losing out on the 47. Let's say they say maximum, just for simplicity, was 100 kilometers an hour. Now I'm at 53 kilometers an hour. When in fact I've promised people I'll be there in an hour because I assume that I'll be driving at this pace. And those people that side is the South African economy. I said that, no, I'll be driving at 100 kilometers an hour, I'll be there on time, you'll be able to meet all their requirements, and suddenly I'm taking forever to come to meet the promise that I had made to the people. And that's the problem that is confronting us. So I mean, I've oversimplified a very complex problem, but essentially what are the top 4 issues? The first one is the underinvestment in this asset. Someone asked a legitimate question, and I keep on underscoring my comments by making that. You have a choice. That choice is that this entity called ESCOM, and we know its problems are well documented, has no money to invest in this capital cost. Now, when you accept that as a given and say there's nothing we can do as a country, then accept that you are going to go to higher stages of load shedding. Then accept that more people are going to lose jobs. Accept that farmers won't be able to produce. Accept that learners will going to have more number of drop calls. And then accept that the total cost to the South African economy continues to be exponential. Or say, but let's take the hit as a South African. Accept that this is expensive, but we need to find money from somewhere. And it's not my space to say where money must come from. But I'm just saying you are faced with that stark choice. We have gotten us into this position. We must get ourselves out of this position. So protect the balance sheet, collapse the South African economy. Burden the balance sheet or additional fiscal support, it's got its own downside implications. Save the South African economy. Once it thrives, you are able to get your return backs. Protecting the employment, broadening the tax base, greater levels of investment, the economy grows, the National Revenue Fund grows, you are able to defray those upfront capital costs. That's the point that I'm making. And I'll present that, and Cabinet will make that determination. And yes, accept that some of these interventions are a medium term. So, like I said, the 2,100 megawatts from Kusile will come in December rather, the last unit. We are entering a very difficult period of winter. I did say when I started, and I say at its worst, peak demand could be about 37,000 megawatts. But we can guarantee 27,000 megawatts if you look at the trend line. So the deficit is about 10,000 megawatts. If you continue at this kind of efficiency, so you can improve the efficiency and then also run your open cycle gas turbines and reduce the deficit to levels that are acceptable. And levels that are acceptable, I mean, it's relative, but at least as a basic minimum, don't go beyond, worst case scenario, don't go beyond stage 6. That I can guarantee you, no, I can't say that now because units keep on tripping. I made the point when I went to Matla just the other day, in the space of 45 minutes addressing management and the workers, 1,600 megawatts just went. Close to 2 stages of load shedding. That's the problem that's confronting us. And that's why you need to create that window to address this. And I did say at the conclusion that I shared with you the interventions on the fossil fuel side and the nuclear. I took time at the beginning to say, if you look at the integrated resource plan, because that's the Bible that guides, if you like, the distribution of various technology sources from the generation side, you'll see that the share of renewables is increasing exponentially. So if we are to be told today that this PV solar power project on a megawatt to megawatt basis, base load, will be able to answer the question, then direct us to where this is. And I'm telling you, it doesn't exist. Just shared with you the profile of the energy mix. I said the renewables, they come in at 8:30 to 4:30. My peak is earlier than that in the morning and later than that in the evening. Direct us to where this solution exists. And when you do PV, you must pay it with battery, at least to attempt to give it the base load, or construct the pump stations, which in fact are most resilient than a battery. Battery gives you spend about 50 million rands per megawatt, pump storage 30 million per megawatt. Battery gives you a life of 20 years, pump storage gives us a life of 70 years. Pump storage also provides the other function of balancing the water resources. So at some point we must have an honest conversation about these technologies. It's not an average minister or some person who just doesn't know these technologies. No, we must be told the truth. Show me a country in the world that base load is supported by solar. It doesn't exist. But that does not mean that our commitment to decarbonization is undermined. I said when I started, it's in the interest of South Africa and her people and the economy We'll make that case. If we are squashed, we are squashed, but we'll be able to illustrate in numbers. It's not a binary question. I keep on making, it's not fossil fuels or renewables, it's both. It's the pace with which you move, the extent to which you are able to replenish. I have told you that in the next few 12 months or so, you could be taking out about close to 2,000 megawatts. Show me where are we going to retrieve it. The example of Komati, as I speak to you, the last unit was 100 megawatts that was taken out. In total, it was 1,000 megawatts. It's replaced by wind, solar, that combination. And then it guarantees you, at least at base load, I think it's about 170 megawatts or about 200 megawatts. So you remove 1,000 megawatts, you replace it with, let's use the high end, 250 megawatts. Tell me where's the math there? Is the interest of the country, South Africa, and her people. And that doesn't mean that we are committed. It's a decision of cabinet. Government has taken that decision. Our nationally determined contribution, our net zero path, is the pace with which you get there. That's the point that we are raising here. And then there's also an issue about, additional capacity. I've raised it. I mean, if we can get to be directed where these technology solutions from renewables, that gives you this base load. We'll be very happy to make that case in cabinet. And I did say that we are going to sit with the renewable energy complex developers to understand how best we can be able to address this situation going into the future. On the emissions issues, no, I'm not saying that we are going to. I presented 3 options. The first options, as I use the example of Kendall, because that's where it's more pronounced, is that it's as-is conditions. Allow us to run the car at lower efficiencies because we don't want to contaminate the environment, and accept that there's very little you can do to protect the South African economy by reducing the higher levels of load shedding, and then protect the environment. That's the one option. The other option is to say, no, but the economy is under stress, significant strain. We're going to exceed these emissions levels, and then we save this, but you are going to damage the environment. And then you are outside the legal framework, and someone must be held accountable for that. There's a rule of law in this country. The third option is to do both. Accept that I have these obligations. I want to save the country now. Allow me, give me this exemption. I must illustrate that I'm going to take the following step in the short term, and in the long term, I'll be able to remain within the confines of those parameters. I'm saying that's where part of the options that are before us. I don't make a determination on exemptions. And the party that makes that determination is independent. I have no intention of influencing, but it's about laying what these facts are on the table for us to be able to attend to them. No, I'm not suggesting there was no need for the declaration of a state of disaster. The state of disaster as a result of the electricity challenges has got multiple manifestations. Has got manifestations with regards to the provision of water in this country. We know that the reservoirs are at an elevated level. They are not gravity fed. Because of the cubic meters, the volume that needs to be pumped up there, you need electricity. We know that there's issues around the farming community. When I was sitting with them, they told me that about 23% of their revenue relies on reliable energies. That's irrigation and also maintaining the cold chain. We're sitting in this room just the other day with the original equipment manufacturer from the automotive industry and the importers, sharing with us the decline of the share of production of South Africa as a total of production on the continent. It has moved from 73%, we are at about 52 or 53% as a result of, amongst others, load shedding. They are making a case for that. I sat with one of the leading hospital groups yesterday. They're explaining to me what are the implications. So I'm just saying that load shedding affects all these areas. I'm saying from a generation point of view on the interventions that can be made. The things that I've shared with you, which are the top 4, top 5 interventions, did not rely on the state declaration of the state of disaster. There are interventions that Minister Patel has introduced on the one-stop shop. They remain. There are interventions that were made, the Department of Communication. They remain. When you remove the state of disaster, it does not remove those interventions that were made, because it's out of the state of disaster that you have those interventions. And in the consideration of the players in those spaces, that is sufficient for us to be able to respond. So no, not at all. Cabinet sufficiently applied itself, considered all of this, arrived at that determination. And then, as Minister Nkanime mentioned yesterday, was that it gets to be reviewed, revised all the time, reviewed all the time, and a determination was made that we need to terminate the declaration. And then on the issues of the authority, of course, Minister Mantashe is on the issues of policy. He's a custodian of the integrated resource plan. ESCOM is just a player on the integrated resource plan from a point of view of the fossil fuels, because they are participating in that area of generation, and then there are multiple players. And then Minister Mantashe is also the broader conversation around energy. Electricity is just but one small component of energy. Minister Kodan is a shareholder representative, and that's why when I started, I said, when we went to these plans, we moved with our colleagues from DPE so that we are able to illustrate a joined-up government. The President will still make that determination. He did say, as you have correctly mentioned, when he announced the introduction of the ministry, that he will reassign those responsibilities. So it's not my space. I'm not about to venture into that space. It's a domain that is exclusively that of the President, and he'll make that determination. On the energy action plan, so what we're going to do, like I said, when you go to Cabinet, we think that there were targets that were set out. We want to, on the basis of the options that we are presenting before them, we are able to illustrate how these targets can be revised, either upwards or downwards, or maintained. So Tembi, that's a conversation we'll have. And I'm sure that once we complete that, we should be in a position to share with you exactly what that means going into the future. I did make the point that on the units that are being discontinued, that there's a case for you to ask the market what is possible. And that's not a subtraction from what Minister Godongwana said. And as you have correctly mentioned, that's an option that is before the table. And I must underscore that that does not amount to privatization of that fossil fuel space. It's about the participation of the market. And there are various options that are there: build, operate, transfer. Essentially, the people continue to own that asset going into the future. And then, yes, Heidi, I did make the point around the winter projections. I think you can see that it's going to become a very difficult winter, also from ESCOM's projection. One of the things that is understated is the possibilities we're having on the demand side. We're talking with Salga, we're talking with the energy intense users. And the point there is that if you look at households, for an example, our modeling suggests that they consume about 16% of installed capacity. At peak, they can consume up to 35%, and up to 30% of that 35% comes from the geysers. There's technology that exists that allows to remotely switch off the geysers, not to draw from the grid. And in terms of that modeling, there's a significant amount of megawatts that can be saved. Anything conservatively from 2,500 megawatts, optimistically up to 4,000 megawatts. And that's why when I started, I said we're doing both, ramping up generation and attempting to bring down demand without undermining the ability of households to meet their own needs and businesses to meet the shareholder returns, but essentially getting the South African economy going. I think I've answered all of them. Thanks.
No, Minister, can I come in? I'm sorry.
Sure, wait,
asked about
can you just hold on?
Oh, sorry.
Sure. There's a question online. Gugani, if you can just read it from Carol Payton.
There are two questions. One is from Linda Esno from Business Day. The question reads, given the number of allegations about corruption at ESCOM power stations, why does the minister not mention this as a contributing factor to the low electricity generation and high levels of load shedding? Does the high levels of corruption have a negative impact on Eskom's ability to invest in these power stations? The second one is from Carol Patton from News 24. South Africa committed to the nationally determined contributions at COP26. Ambitious goals rely on all power stations meeting their decommission dates, plus early retirement of Tutuka. How do you think these objectives of energy security and the nationally determined contributions should be balanced?
Thanks, SABC.
Thank you. I wanted to find out about the term. When are you going to be approaching Cabinet for this declaration of, or some of these issues that you found out? And also the issue of the army, to say that what were your findings? Are they staying there? And it's also linked to issues of corruption that was asked by my colleague here, Kukwano, through the business tech. Thank you.
You still have a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to ask about the corruption in the army. If the minister can just touch on that. Thank you.
Okay, now let me start. I think Linda was not on the call when I started the meeting. When I mapped the situation at Kusile and Medupi on the premature failure of components, on the fact that they are not the original parts that are used there, I said they can be associated to incidents of corruption that took place before during construction. And I did make the point that there are people who are before the courts, and the courts will make that determination. That's what I said. So I don't know what more should I say. So essentially trying to illustrate that there is that link, and it's more pronounced when you get to Kusile and Medupi. On the version of management, I have no reason to doubt them. So I've said that. And then on the issues around the army, now I don't have jurisdiction on when is the army getting to be deployed, what the reports are. They don't get to report to me. I think the Commander-in-Chief and the Minister of Defense is the one who will receive those reports. And when I get to stations, I really don't interfere with that space. And when I made the power stations, when they raise issues of the possibility of or suspicion that there could be issues of corruption, one of the things that I do immediately, like I picked up when I was one of the power station to Tuga in particular, when the matter was raised, was to elevate it to one of our work stream, which is work stream number 9. That is populated by competent people who have an appreciation of what it takes to address and deal with corruption. So all that I do is to elevate it. I neither have the capacity nor the mandate to do that. But on the technical engineering side, that's my area of competency. I'm more prolific there, and that's why we can speak with some degree of confidence on how we see the technical solutions on how we want to deal with the load shedding. Just to Carol Ms. Payton there, I mean, it's a brilliant question. So the point I'm making is that, and I did say that at the end, so we have made commitments to the nationally determined contribution, the net zero path. So the point I'm saying, I'm not tampering with that, and I don't have the capacity to tamper with that because it's a country commitment. All I'm saying is that there has to be a thing around the aggressiveness with which we are going to achieve that. And of course, it will have by implications whether the timelines that are there are the timelines that we can meet. First, our obligations to the environment and posterity, but also our obligation to the South African economy. And in fashioning these choices that I referred to above on what we think should be the case, we also relate to what are the implications to those timelines as codified in the NDC, as codified in the net zero path. And it's up to the competent body, which is cabinet, to make that determination. So I have no intention through a media briefing to interfere or revise those, but I'm simply mapping out what we are confronted with and what we think is the most plausible interventions that we can make without inflicting additional injury to the South African economy, but also without abrogating our commitments to the environment and the multiple at international fora. I've done the fossil part. We are going to do the part on the renewable energy complex, that is additional generation, including the part of the possibility of importing power from neighboring countries. We've got to be, if you like, approached by parties that say, look, this is what is possible. We'll examine those, the technical feasibility of those issues. We're engaging with the commercial banks, the DFI, in particular IDC, DBSA, the NEF. Will be engaging with the NYDA on the issues of demand side. Once I pull all of that together, I'll be able to go to cabinet. I'm confident that I should go to cabinet before the end of April. Of course, as we do that, there are interventions that are being made. So this must not be misunderstood as something not being done. We still have something called the Energy Action Plan, and the minister has been appointed to execute against that plan. All we are saying is this enhancement, Tembile, on what is possible going into the future with regards to the timelines of the Energy Action Plan. Thanks.
I think there was one last question.
No,
Oh, a second last one. You go first, please.
if you will indulge me, Minister, please, on the refurbishments that you're proposing, yes, it is the domain of the Finance Minister. He will have to find that money, but how much will you be asking?
Oh, Lord, yes.
Thanks, Minister. Terence, Cream Engineering News. Just on the issue of meeting with the other components of the electricity supply industry, which is in massive generational change. We've never seen change like this. So we need to speak to the other components, not just the fossil and the nuclear. When will that happen, and who are the sounding boards that you're going to be meeting with before you go take this revised plan to Cabinet? So you said before the end of April you want to take this to Cabinet, but when will you be meeting and who will you be meeting with? And then just a question around the life extension thing and the philosophical framework that you're taking. You know, anything for an engineer is technically possible, but it doesn't mean it's financially doable or socially or environmentally desirable to take those actions. And you used the example of a motor vehicle. And there's a time when the insurance company with the owner decides it's better to scrap that vehicle rather than to try and extend its life. And you know, those are real decisions that you take from a financial, you know, and from a benefit perspective, as well as the fact that there's a diminishing return, you know, making a massive investment. And generally what we would do to make a massive investment in a vintage car is that you're going to try and use that as little as possible. You're going to keep it in the garage, keep it painted, not doing what we've done here, gone outside of the service manual, not maintained to the service manual. When they are available, use at very high utilization factors, which deepens the maintenance backlog. And then you're wanting to go to banks and insurance companies or even concessionaires and say extend the life. Do you think it's, one, financially doable, and two, is it desirable from a social perspective? Because on a cost-benefit analysis, technically it is possible to have a system led by your cheapest new electrons, which is solar, wind, and backed up with some form of flexible generation. You know that. That's technically possible. But from a cost-benefit analysis, sure, you need to do that as Minister of Energy before you start talking about life extensions of something that's been overused, under-maintained, and possibly has a huge difficulty in funding. Thank you.
And I do that exceptionally well. So what you are not answering and telling everyone is in that computation, it's a one-dimensional approach. You say the life extension, what it costs, you will not be able to generate the amount of efficiency that are required. Then answer the next question. Don't leave it there. Answer the next question. What is the cost to the South African economy for not providing the kind of energy that is required? And I've computed what that is. So essentially we're talking about now where we are, 550 billion rands per annum of unserviced energy. There's cost to farmers. There's, they do make the point that there's a relationship between the food price inflation and load shedding. The South African Reserve Bank, that the economy is barely growing because of load shedding. So it's a totality of all of this. So it's not just, and also from what is socially acceptable. People are out of jobs. There are families today that don't know where to get their next meal as a result of, amongst others, load shedding. So that's a computation. It's a complex computation. It's not just an engineering solution that is confronting us. And my obligation, I have an obligation as an engineer, and I'm also a social scientist. And I bring all of those together and say this is what is possible. Ultimately, Cabinet will make that determination. And that's the point that I'm simply making, is the totality of this. I did say when I started, and I'm making this public, I keep on going out to people, just direct me to a country in the world whose base loads is almost exclusively supported by renewables. And I really want to be educated, and I accept that I might have those limitations. And then we have a different conversation, and the speed with which that can come on stream. But here's the car. Yes, it's got its own problems, but this car, we can invest in it, and it buys us some time as we seek for those solutions. And that's the point that I'm making. We're mapping all of this before us. Let me finish. I'm mapping all of this before us so that we're able to get the answers to this question. Tembileno, I don't have the answer. I've not computed what it will take from the CAPEX point of view, and that's a conversation that I'm sure what Cabinet will say. Okay, if you think that this is the route to go, I think we can do the numbers. We are attempting to do that even before we go, because we already know, for an example, when we go from one station to the other, they tell us that this is our CAPEX schedule. If you had to do the following, then you are in a position to achieve this and that. I think that was, and then yes, Kenneth, I'm guided by the Presidential Climate Commission is directing me to the players in that space, so we'll engage with them. I'm just saying, even if anyone here has a knowledge of who are these players, where are they organized, we are more than happy to engage with them as an organized voice, because in some instances we know that there are stranded electrons as a result of the deficiencies or deficits, if you like, on the grid side. There has to be investments in that space, and of course we know that the balance sheet of ESCOM might not be able to accommodate the kind of investments that are required there. When we're speaking to one of the commercial banks in this country, they say they've done a study, and that study suggests that you need up to 100 billion rands just to strengthen the grid. We haven't gone into details of how they've arrived at that. So I think it's a conversation that we'll have with the players in that space, and then they'll also say to us, look, we are able to bring the following on stream, but this is the hurdle rate from the policy and regulatory point of view. And yesterday when we were giving the briefing on the state of disaster determination supporting Minister Nkadimeng, we made the point that there's a provision in the Infrastructure Development Act that allows us to truncate that process of permitting and licensing without necessarily invoking what would have been the provision of the state of disaster. So there's existing pieces of legislation. If read together, they'll be able to help us to address some of the challenges in the space.
Sorry, thank you, Minister. It's Mary Mesa from Business Intelligence. My one question wasn't answered. Even if you put aside the issues of the money and the energy transition and all of that in the environment, all of that aside, to do the maintenance, to put more money into maintenance, you need more generation capacity to take units offline. And this is one of the problems that we've seen at ESCOM over the past couple of years, with things breaking down everywhere. You just don't have the space to take things offline and avoid severe load shedding. Where's this generation capacity going to come from?
There's one of the things that gets to be discussed is that emergency procurement of additional generation. That's the first part. The second one is that, of course, it must be guarded how I say this. You must, if you look at the stages of load shedding now, we've been oscillating between 3 and 4. And we would have seen that in that instance, ESCOM was almost going on planned maintenance, not running these units all the way. So essentially, you need to have a conversation, and that conversation we haven't had internally, I must admit. To say that, what is that maximum level of load shedding that of course you take it as a given that your generation is not sufficient to meet your demand. And as you take out this unit, of course you are elevating the amount of the levels of load shedding. You need to then compute what is that which is acceptable. We haven't had that conversation on what that level is, which level is acceptable, because generally the philosophy is that load shedding in all its manifestation, whether level 1 or 2, is unacceptable, because we need to get the South Africa's economy going. You are absolutely correct. When you go to the power stations, they tell you, but this unit I can take it out, I can do this maintenance, but I am advised, please keep it running because it's at the great cost to the South African economy. And then the other consideration is around I did say, I think it's 2016 to 18 or so, 13 to 16 or so, when you ran the open cycle gas turbine, they've got huge costs, which in my view are inordinate. And I don't think that the fiscals will be able to carry that. So I'm just saying there's a multiplicity of options, but the net result is what you are saying, which answer does not exist now. You must create an opportunity for us to take out these units and return them. And as we speak now, that opportunity doesn't exist. And that's part of the conversation that we will be having with some of the experts who are joining us on board, and the plant managers. Those are important players in this conversation, to say this is what we think is possible to allow us to create that opportunity. And once we make that determination, I think we can be in a position to communicate to the council.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone. You can speak to myself or Bugano for any other queries that you'd like to take forward. But thanks for your time. Have a lovely day. And enjoy your Easter holidays. And drive safe.
Oh.